Hey everyone, Scott here, and I recently showed you this CSB single column wide margin that I got a good deal on. Said I'm going to use it for my New Testament reading in the next year. And several of you asked if I'd share some more details on the translation after I do, because you're not familiar with it like me. And I will do that, but that'll take a while. I thought for now I'd just go ahead and share some thoughts on how it handles some different verses and passages in 1st and 2nd Samuel. The reason I'm specifically going to look at those is because I did do a pretty deep study of 1st and 2nd Samuel last year. I went through this entire commentary here, Story of God Bible Commentary by Paul S. Evans. Found it very, very helpful. And throughout, I also looked at how things were handled in the NET Bible, the Full Notes Edition, and compared some of the notes with how different translations handled things. Also looked a little bit at Robert Alter's translation of 1st and 2nd Samuel, which Evans interacts with quite a bit in this commentary. So we're just going to look at it, how some things are handled in CSB. I've written some notes down after looking back on what I'd found last year. This won't be super thorough. We're not going to address every issue in 1st and 2nd Samuel, and I think most of these issues, if not all, are not really issues. They're just minor things that are interesting. This is just to look at how it handled some things and to say that I was very impressed overall by how it addressed these situations. So let's get into it. The first verse we'll look at is 1 Samuel chapter 6, verse 19. And it says here, God struck down the people of Beth Shemesh because they looked inside the ark of the Lord. He struck down 70 persons. This is in line with probably most modern translations to say that it was 70 people. However, they note in the footnotes that this is based on some Hebrew manuscripts. Josephus and other Hebrew manuscripts read 70 men, 50,000 men. And we see something like that in the King James and the New American Standard Bible. I looked at the NET. The notes there mention that they didn't feel there was enough external evidence for 70, so the NET has 50,070. Although they did mention that they went with that reluctantly. From what I gather, most of the manuscripts have the 70 men, 50,000 men. It seems a lot of scholars, though, do feel that going with just 70 is the correct option there, and the CSB follows that. I appreciate the footnote, however, gives a fair enough amount of detail for a footnote to help you understand that there are other readings. At the end of chapter 10, before verse 11 starts, there are some additional verses, pretty much a whole paragraph, that is not included in either the Masoretic text or the Septuagint, but is found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And like many modern translations, the CSB includes that paragraph as a footnote to chapter 10, verse 27. And it's included down here, which I appreciate having. The NRSV and the CEB both include it in the text. There might be some others that do too, I'm not certain, but those are the two major translations I'm aware of that include it. The NLT has it in the text as well, but it is in brackets to indicate that, it is questioned. There's different views on that and whether or not a Dead Sea Scrolls reading should be in the main text. I am glad to see that it is included in the footnotes. I feel it's important to have, and it is helpful. In chapter 20, verse 30, it reads, Then Saul became angry with Jonathan and shouted, You son of a perverse and rebellious woman. This is a very typical rendering of this verse in many translations. I noted in the margin the King James, NIV, RSV, ESV, NASB all have something like this. And it is very literal. However, it doesn't capture the force of what he's saying, as the NET notes put it, and I would agree. The Living Bible, at the time when it came out and was popular, drew some controversy because it has Saul saying, "You SOB." However, the NET notes feels that actually does capture what he's saying in terms of using a modern idiom to make it clear that this was a very unrestrained and a vulgar thing he was shouting at him. The NLT, I can't remember exactly how it phrases it, but it's very similar to that. But as the NET notes, many translations go with this more literal rendering because it's more palatable for a Bible verse, especially something that may be read in a Bible study or in church. Although one might wonder whether it's such a concern to worry about vulgar language amidst a story containing so much violence and murder and other such terrible things. But the CSB, as it renders it, it's fine, and it's very typical. We're into 2 Samuel now, and we're actually looking at the NET at the moment, not the CSB. And we're going to look at the end of chapter 8. It notes that David's sons were priests, and there's a note. That David's sons could have been priests in light of the fact that they were not of the priestly lineage is strange. They were not Levites. One must assume that either the word priest during this period of time could be used in a broader sense, or that in David's day, members of the king's family could function as a special category of priests, the NLT as priestly leaders. The latter option seems to be the more straightforward way of understanding the word in 2 Samuel 8:18. So the NET kind of likes that, and they stick with saying priests, which is what the Masoretic text says. Now they did note the parallel in 1 Chronicles 18:17 indicates they're the king's leading officials. And that seems to be what the CSB bases its decision on. The CSB and some other translations, rather than having priests, have something like chief officials. And I noted in the margin here a few translations, NIV, ESV, RSV, and NRSV have priests. They have chief officials, though, in the CSB, and they note in the margin that it is based on the Septuagint. Masoretic text reads priests, and they note the parallel in 1 Chronicles, which supports this change. I think we could debate whether it's appropriate to stray from the Masoretic text here or not, but I'm okay with their choice to do that since they have their reasoning in the margin and indicate what the options are and what they did there. Now looking at chapter 13, this is the terrible story of what happens to Tamar, and Amnon is sending her away. He calls his attendant, and in the CSB he says, "Get this away from me, throw her out, and bolt the door behind her." And you notice it's "get this away," not "get this woman away," as we see in most translations. And this is interesting because woman is not in the Hebrew. The NET notes this, even though it includes the word woman in its translation. This is, it's very much like he's treating her like an object or a thing, which is clear from his actions prior and now clear in how he speaks of her. And this is the only translation I've seen besides Robert Alter's that represents this. They have not included the word woman to try and make it into a more palatable English. In Alter's translation, he says, "Send this creature prey away from me and bolt the door behind her." And Alter notes that what he's saying here, it's stingingly contemptuous, and he notes that at the same time he is speaking brutally to Tamar, he is polite to his servant, using the particle of entreaty, pray. So I think the CSB does a really great job of representing this, not I like this a lot better in alters, but the CSB is good at showing that he wasn't even calling her a woman. Chapter 21, verse 19 is a verse that I always like to check in any translation that I'm new to. Here in verse 19, it tells us that Elhanan killed Goliath of Gath, and that seems to contradict 1 Samuel 17, where we're told that David killed Goliath. There's different views on what to make of this and how to treat it. A lot of translations will change it to say the brother of Goliath, and that's a fair change to make. It's based on 1 Corinthians chapter 20, verse 5. The CSB left it as it is and just adds a footnote indicating what 1 Chronicles 25 says. I would have been okay with them putting brother of in the main text as long as they had this note indicating why they chose to do that. Well, that covers everything I wanted to look at in 1st and 2nd Samuel, but before we go, I'm going to look at one more verse because, like the previous one, this is something I look at in every Bible I pick up every time I'm looking at a new translation. And that is Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. And those of you who know your Bible already know why we're looking at this. It says here, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. See, the virgin will conceive, have a son, and name him Emmanuel." And this is a verse that has been very controversial since the RSV many decades ago translated virgin instead as young woman, which is based on the Hebrew word alma, and there is quite a bit of debate about how that should be handled and whether virgin is a fair translation. The Septuagint, which is the Greek Old Testament, has their Parthenos, which does mean virgin, but the Hebrew word from the Masoretic text is much broader than that. Many translations, Christian translations, will have virgin here, and that's a whole nother conversation. You could do a whole series of videos on whether that's valid or not. I'm fine with it. I am disappointed, though, to see the CSB does not have a footnote indicating that Alma is taken to be young woman in a broader sense. It has absolutely no footnote regarding the use of the word virgin or potential alternatives at all. I think this is an area where you need to mention that. There needs to be a note, because if you're a Christian and you're coming across anyone who's kind of skeptical or wants to try and attack the Bible, you're going to hear this. It's going to come up, and it's something you need to educate yourself on. It's really, this is the big issue that led to me to really study the Bible more deeply in terms of looking into issues of translation and textual variants and what is the Septuagint and all that kind of thing. So would have liked to seen the CSB make that decision clearer. But, that's my only real criticism so far. As we saw in terms of looking at 1st and 2nd Samuel, I think it handled everything really well. It was very clear about the choices it made, and I was especially impressed in how it handled the words of Amnon to Tamar. It, like Alter, captured that translation from the Hebrew much better than most English translations do. So I hope you found this helpful or interesting. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are after watching this. If you have any opinions on how it handled things, or, leave them in the comments below. Give me a like if you enjoyed the video, and I invite you to subscribe if you haven't already. As always, God bless. I thank you for watching, and we'll see you for the next one.